Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review a movie called Barbed Wire. So, going into this movie, I never actually fully fledgedly watched this film in its entirety, and plus, also, whenever I was to probably watch this, it was probably to be, heavily edited because it was usually on TV most of the time when I was to catch any parts of this movie. So, yeah, I'm sure this movie had to be heavily edited. Just because when honestly looking at the film, I'm like, well, yeah, I could see how now when finally watching this film, there was probably a chunk of stuff taken out of it. So where could you go out of your way to say that you've finally seen Barbed Wire if you've never seen it before, or maybe you're a Pam Anderson fan, or you just want to go and reflect on this movie and just see how good or interesting it was, because maybe you went into this because you liked this film. You can go out of your way to see this in two different ways. You can go into one movie called or an app called C Movies, letter C Movies, or you can go into Fox HD Movies, which the logo will say so, but I think the title says play 1080p movies. But if you search Fox HD Movies, you should be able to find this uh, app fairly quickly. You can watch any number of things for free. There isn't a fee, there isn't a subscription, there isn't a whatever. Unless you don't want to have ads, then you could probably have a fee for a certain period of time or whatever. So, but yeah, so going into this film, we have a woman who is to own a bar, but then also be a bounty hunter. And I can't help but, while going through this movie, just going this feels just like Escape from LA. It seemed like, I don't know when any of these movies were to be done, so I'm just kind of connecting, things here. Like, to me, this either kind of feels like the Keanu Reeves movie Johnny Mnemonic, as far as the story goes, where there's this woman with this cure, and she is to be getting to forcibly, desperately need to get safe passage to make her way into Canada, so that way she can be able to uh, have this cure and be able to go to the freedom fighters or the resistance to concoct this cure to fight this evil regime called the Congressional Directorate, which I'm not going to be pronouncing that every single time I go in here. But yeah, so it seems that going into this movie, there is, of course, a lot of times where uh, really Pam is to really be in amazing shape in this film, and we get to see those shapes consistently throughout, which is bravo to that woman. Um, but also we get to really see some interesting action sequences, and I think parts of this movie is really fun to just go man, this story does feel very unique, and it does still kind of feel very timeless. It doesn't feel even though with the funny thing of this saying that it's the end of the world or whatever this thing happens is in 2017, which I'm yeah, that didn't happen. But we have this city called Steel Harbor, which I guess is the only place that seems to be free from the congressional directives grasp. That it seems that there is martial law in every place but this one spot, because really we just have a lot of people who can just pay off the right person. um but yeah, so this feels kind of like Escape from LA, the Keanu Reeves movie Johnny Mnemonic a little bit. um Not the cyberpunk kind of deal of it, but there's a little bit of story that I kind of feel kind of reminiscent from that. Also, this kind of course, feels like Tank Girl, um, because of kind of just the way that this woman is to be freaking leathered up, and eventually she is to go through all these outfit changes, and eventually just overall how it just kind of there's some parts here where it kind of gets a little wild as far as like they do the movies, but like not as like extreme as Tank Girl, but like the tamer version of Tank Girl. Um, but yeah, people like if you've never seen Tank Girl before, definitely check that out. Also, if people don't know, because people may not be aware, Barb or Pamela Anderson eventually went on to do a thing with Stan Lee called Stripperella, which I don't know, like what actual version like somebody would probably actually get. Um, but I know there's probably like somewhere probably an uncensored version of the that whole entire show because obviously that show had to get censored for certain reasons. But maybe there's probably an uncensored copy of that out there somewhere, and probably someone could pick it up. But yeah, like that kind of also feels very reminiscent of this movie if people don't know that that exists. So, with that said, let's go out of our way to go into spoilers about this. Well, we can kind of tee it up and then we'll go into spoilers. So, what is this movie about? So, this woman owns a bar and she's a bounty hunter. Technically, really, we have Barbed Wire, who is to be this neutral character, and we have this kind of like Lola Bunny kind of like situation where whenever Barbed Wire is to have a man call her babe, she ends up just freaking losing it and just beating the crap out of him or hurting him pretty bad or killing him. And so that seems to be like the running gag in this movie where it's just like anyone who's to call her that magical word because evidently they can't come up with anything else, they have to die shortly thereafter or they have to be hurt really bad or whatever. So going through this, there's kind of this like high tech parts of this movie where eventually you get these like these retinal scanners, and you get like whenever anyone is to go into an apartment building, they have to get retinal scanned and whatever. Like it's a really interesting like approach to like the distant future of things where it seems like that's where eventually we're going to go just so that way we can get into our houses because maybe that'll just eventually be a thing, which good luck for that when eventually you get wintertime and that thing is going to freaking not work out. Like, hey, retinal scanner, that doesn't work during wintertime. Oh, that's great. How am I going to get in my freaking house? Oh, okay, I just have to use a key freaking anyways. Great. So, but yeah, we also have this moment where like we have a guy named Charlie who is to be this like blind character. I'm like, what is it with places and bars where you always have to have this like one blind character? Like, look at the Patrick Swayze movie Roadhouse, where you have like the one lead singer of the band and he's playing the guitar and like he's blind and he's like yeah, that's Dalton or whatever. Like the Patrick Swayze character. I'm like, why is it that every bar there has to be like some blind person? Like maybe that doesn't seem as like a thing that happens so often to anyone else, but it just seems to like be a very familiar territory for me for some reason. I don't know why. But yeah, so and I guess I only had one true example of that, but like no offense to blind people or no offense to anyone, but anyways, so eventually, like we bizarrely have the enemy who is to have this kind of style of clothing, which I'm like, okay, why do they have to have like this style of clothing? Like we have everybody who has like the goofiest like getup, as if like they're like you can't tell what actual country they're from or what like we have like the police officer who's to wear this like United Kingdom kind of like police outfit. So I'm just like, where is this even from? Like, it just seems like supposedly that this is all to be done in America, but it doesn't seem like America. But then also, what the heck is Steel Harbor anyway? It just seems like a random mash of things that they just try to like reuse because there were cheap stuff being done. Um, but yeah, like I didn't mind it. Like, I guess there was some kind of like visual look that they were trying to go with here, and I'm hoping that nothing that I said sounded insensitive. It's just like just the weird approach that they kind of go with these things. Um, I don't know, but let's go on to mention. Uh, like yeah, we get a quite a few action sequences here. We have Pam's character kind of running around. We also get a flashback helping us understand both Charlie and Axel's situation. Axel is the character that ends up bringing um, uh, the doctor into this scenario. Like the guy who ends up playing Abensor and the numerous clones of like Star Wars Part Two or Star Wars uh, the Clone Wars saga, like that guy who played a billion of those people. So yeah, so I'll get into actual names when we actually get into uh, the whole play of it. But it's like so. Let's get into this. Let's just go into spoilers. I've talked about this movie long enough. Let's go into spoiler time because it's about that time again to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time to get into spoil this movie. So, very beginning of this is to like there's a lot of scenes where Pam is just to be like revealed basically. You can almost tell like most of this movie it's like man, like we're just one like sneeze away from like a wardrobe malfunction because they're basically like showing all this woman's like goodies for the most point and it just feels like man, like it's not that the clothes are tight, it's just that it feels like it's not like positioned correctly. Just seems weird. Um, but anyways, like thumbs up to whoever also put all that get up together because it looks great. And of course, like Pam looks amazing in this film for most of the point. So uh, we end up having in the very beginning of this sequence, we have like Pam in this kind of flash dance like sequence where she's like covered in water. She's freaking getting hit with water everywhere. As well as I think her and I think some other women are dancing, but I can't quite tell. Um, and so, of course, Barb is or Barb Wire. I don't know whether to call her like Barb Wire or just Barb. I'll call her Barb, and hopefully that's correct. Uh, so Barb is to eventually go and like dance, and you can kind of just see almost like everything with the exclusion of like down belows, if you know what I'm saying. But it just seems like you can kind of see like flashes of stuff everywhere. So we have one guy who is, of course, like, yeah, take it all off, yeah. And so, of course, this guy is to call Barb Babe, and so of course he ends up getting a shoe in his mouth for his troubles. So eventually, that is to just kind of transition us to uh, kind of getting to the story of this that we eventually have barbed wire who is starting to run out of money. We have this character who is to be called I think Curly. Yeah, Curly, who is to tell Barb it's like, hey, like I need to get paid this month. Like I would love to like get some money like to get together. Like can we get some scratch here? So that forcibly leads to have uh, Pam eventually running off to go after a guy named Krebs, who is to be. And here's the goofy way that we go about this too. So, uh, that's why I'm kind of flipping through a lot of stuff. Because I have to figure out everyone's freaking name in here because everybody has a freaking goofy name. So, barbed wire is to eventually go and set up at this one part of this street to entice this guy named Ruben, who is this kind of big colossus of a man. He's very muscular and very big, beefy man. And so, evidently, Barb Wire's character is to showcase that, like, she has this, like, medical card that says that she's a prostitute, which is so weird, and that she had gotten medically checked and that she's in the clear. So, Ruben is to say, like, oh, okay, well, like, I'll take you. Like, I'll have you as my lady of the night. So, Ruben is to mention that he likes it rough, and Barbed Wire is like, well, good, because I like it rough too. So, so Ruben goes uh, into his an apartment. He has to like retinal scan to get in there. So, uh, Ruben eventually goes into his room and then has to change out of his outfit to his bizarrish like S&M leather clothes. So Ruben is to have this paddle of sorts, and so Barbed Wire's character ends up grabbing the paddle, like turning Ruben around and smacking him upside the head, knocking him out, just so that way Barb can eventually go on to placing these explosives all over this wall and put a mattress on there and detonate the explosives just so Barbed Wire can eventually go after the guys on the other end of this wall, because this is where this Krebs guy is to be. Like, we see Barbed Wire going and having these like binoculars to kind of see through this wall, like X-ray vision, and she sees that Krebs is there. So, so Barbed Wire explodes through this wall, eventually shooting up all these guys, or like most of these guys, and so she ends up going and grabbing Krebs and taking his body to a guy named uh, to a bounty hunter collection guy that is to be Schmitz. That eventually we find later in the film, Schmitz is to be the guy that is to have these certain like contacts you can put in your eyes that can um, go through any retinal scan and you would be completely fine. And so it's like, ooh, that's the big thing in this movie. Like, cause like for like when you look at like a Snake Plissken kind of movie, there's always that one thing that like Snake Plissken has to get, or like there's the one like high end item during this whole uh like caper that people like, ooh, like I can make a ton of money off of selling this. So uh so eventually uh we have this general, or we have this villain, Colonel Pricer, who is to be torturing this woman to try to get information about Coral D, who is to be this doctor who is to have supposedly done plastic surgery to change her looks so that way no one will realize that this woman is this doctor. And so like they're desperately trying to figure out how to get information about what this woman looks like, or trying to get any information of like where this girl will head to. And so this Prizer guy is like torturing this woman, and we just kind of see like all this like torture device like covering her head and barely like covering her like chest, and then like covering her like her like basically just bikini line, and that's about it. So this girl is just like, you can pretty much see a boatload of everything. So this girl gets tortured and eventually is to squeak out this information. So uh Prizer is to eventually go on and now just be like, oh, okay, well, we can kind of figure out that she's going to head to the resistance and try to get the heck out of here. Try to go to Canada and try to but like she needs to find the right person that is gonna help her to make it to that gap. So they have to kind of figure out where that can be. So that leads us to eventually having seemingly the one place uh, where really anybody can kind of sneak past anybody, and that is to actually be at Barb Wire's bar, the Hammerhead, where we have a detective named Alexander Willis, who is to eventually try and scan certain people's eyes because some people might have false identities, but Willis is just trying to scan identities so that way he can get paid off by Barbed Wire, so Willis could just go away and ha ha ha, I got paid by her again, because I'm gonna just go to continue to come through here to get my payoff. So we also had a moment right after Barbed Wire was to eventually go and do her dance. We have this guy who is to be Sharif, that is to eventually have some guy want to pay top dollar to have Barbed Wire uh, like do something for him, probably pay for like sex or whatever. So Barbed Wire is to eventually do her dance, and so Sharif ends up coming back into the backstage in the very beginning of this movie, before the whole bounty hunter situation and whichever, and uh, so Barbed Wire is eventually gonna have this cigarette that she's gonna try to light, and she hopes that Sharif has a lighter and he doesn't. But Barbed Wire is to instead shoot this little dart at Sharif's forehead, drop him like a sack of potatoes, and eventually make her way out of here without having to raise suspicion about like that this guy was gonna take advantage of her or whatever, that she was probably gonna just beat the crap out of him. But yeah, so Barbed Wire uh, releases Krebs to this bounty hunter, and what ends up happening is Willis is to tell Barbed Wire, it's hey, if anything, there's a pretty huge bounty on Krebs, and supposedly I've been hearing that maybe you've been hiding out some Krebs, and so we're gonna go and that's why Willis scanned all the retinals of all these people, because Willis is to tell Barbed Wire that supposedly they've been supposedly there's some suspicions that Barbed Wire is hiding out Krebs. So eventually, when that bounty hunter Schmitz is to come back, telling Barbed Wire about the contacts, Barbed Wire is to mention that she didn't get the right payment for Krebs, because supposedly it was $1 million, and she didn't get I think she only got 20 grand, I think, where where Barbed Wire just kind of tosses it to Curly and say, hey, pay off people, pay off the workers in here. Let me pause here for a second. All right. So Alex and I'm gonna probably ill pronounce this whole entire time. Alex and Caro B, or Cara B, or Cara D, good God, Cara. Alex and Cara make their way to this bar to try and hope that barbed wire is going to help them. And because Alex technically knows both Charlie and both barbed wire, and so he thinks, oh, well, there's an easy in for me to just have these people help me to help Kara get to Canada. And so barbed wire is like, no, I'm not going to freaking help you. Like, even though it seems that Barb and Alex have this history, that it seems that Barb really wants to make out with Alex, and Cora is just like, hey, like, do you guys need some time alone? Like, freaking, like, hey, like, you do realize there's a mission going on here, right? And so Barb is just kind of like to consistently flash her goodies right in front of Alex to, I guess, like, tempt him to like be jealous of the fact that Barb is like holding back interest in Alex and so on and so forth. Because eventually, what ends up happening is there is this flashback that Barb was to be in the military with her brother Charlie, like doing this helicopter mission, and they were waiting on Alex, and eventually, like, things went haywire during that time, and so, like, really there's maybe resentment or something like that. But anyway, so Alex goes to Barb's brother Charlie to get to barbed wire, and barbed wire is deciding to not help Charlie whatsoever. But barbed wire is deciding not to help Alex and Carl whatsoever. So Charlie is just decide, well, you know what? Like, how about I can help you guys out? Uh, we also have to have Charlie tell Alex that he is now blind because we now have to understand Charlie's backstory, that eventually there was some kind of certain kind of grenade that ended up like seeking him out and he couldn't figure out how to like protect himself. So uh Charlie was to send Alex and Cora to uh this wing of uh these characters called Spike and these kind of like just resistance kind of members. And so eventually, when they are to get to these people, we have also uh, uh, Prizer, who is to eventually go and uh, go into one of the heads of the Krebs and find out that barbed wire was to go off and kill all these Krebs. And so now they're just like, okay, now we need to question barbed wire and we need to like understand like what her connection is to all these Krebs and why she killed them all off. So Willis is trying to protect barbed wire and just say like, hey, like, technically this is just some image from some guy. Like, I don't know how many guys from all over town have been having secret thoughts about barbed wire all the time. So like, this could mean nothing, because it's little flashes and little blips of things from this guy's head, and like, who knows what any of this really means. Like, Willis is trying to defend the whole imagery of barbed wire, but we have Prizer, who is to just go like, hey, like, we're gonna go into barbed wire's like bar and clean it out because we're like, she's in so much suspicion that like we think that she's hiding something. So Prizer and his men are to go on to the bar, and what eventually ends up happening is they tear apart the bar. Coincidentally, the bounty hunter guy, who was to have the contacts, was to slip the contacts somewhere in the bar, but while they were to tear this place apart, Charlie was to find the contacts and put it in his back pocket or one of his pockets, so that eventually he will be able to have this as hey, if the bar is torn up, at least we have these contacts that can make us tons and tons of money. So Curly is just kind of tossing his money to the ground while they're tearing this bar apart, because what's the point of having this money if eventually the bar is just going to no longer exist or not be able to exist. So that leads us to eventually having Charlie going to the Resistance and mentioning how he is to quite possibly have somebody that has the contact lenses to be able to give to Cora to make her way through Canada. Sadly enough, when Charlie's make his way to Spike and the Resistance, all of the members of this Resistance are to be killed off by Prizer. So that eventually leads Charlie to get tortured and to eventually get killed. And that pushes Barbed Wire to eventually go, oh, okay, well, all of these congressional guys, they are going to die now because they ended up killing my brother. So what ends up happening is Barb is to work with Alex and Cora, and of course try to take down all these congressional guys to give this girl safe passage. So what ends up happening is Prizer ends up arresting Barbed Wire, but we have Willis, who ends up giving her a grenade to eventually help her try and get out of this. So Barbed Wire ends up going and holding up a grenade, and so everybody starts to run off because they don't want to get hit with this grenade. So eventually Barbed Wire is to make her escape to eventually go on and work with Alex and Cora, of course. So what ends up happening is Barbed Wire is to eventually align herself with this guy called Big Fatso, and to try to orchestrate this deal or this exchange that she can probably sell off these contact lenses to be able to get certain kind of things of money and so on and so forth. And what ends up happening is they're trying to do this exchange to maybe get a Cora safe passage, ba 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 ba. So what ends up happening is Big Fatso is to work with the congressional guys that Prizer and his people, and that ends up getting revealed, and it's man, you just can't trust anybody in this world. So we have this big, huge fight out where we kind of have Willis and Alex and Cora and Barbed Wire all trying to make this huge take everybody out kind of defense. We have Barbed Wire who ends up going in the back of this vehicle that they're in to get out into this motorcycle to start gunning everybody down, and we just have this huge onslaught of fighting and stunts and everything like that going on here. And so eventually this leads to having Prizer coming out of excuse me. Coming out of nowhere with this forklift and just kind of attacking Barbed Wire with this forklift. And so what ends up happening is Alex is to eventually see this crane that is being operated by some guy. And so Alex is asking him certain questions about this crane, and then he ends up knocking him out. So then he can take control of the crane to then like lift this forklift up in the air and eventually like have it up high enough to where Barb Wire's character can eventually drop it at some perfect time. Where like Barb and Prizer having this decent fight out, and then eventually Barbed Wire is to eventually have Prizer call her babe, and that's when, of course, where or Barbed Wire is saying, of course, don't call me babe, and that's when she ends up releasing the crane to have the forklift and the car like dropping with Prizer on top of it to where he ends up dropping to his death and he ends up dying, and that kind of takes care of everybody, and that eventually leads to Barb having the contacts in her eyes, and so she ends up taking them out to give to Cora. Which I'm like, doesn't this obviously look like this woman like doesn't have natural blue eyes? Wouldn't have anybody have spotted that? But I guess no. So this girl just goes and gets this thing scanned, and she ends up being able to perfectly be able to um, make her way through on to Canada, and so now the excuse me. Now the question is to ask, like, well, hey, what is Barbed Wire gonna do? And supposedly Barbed Wire mentions that Paris is nice this time of year, and so that just leads us to eventually just assume everybody just goes their separate ways, and like just eventually just decides like I'm gonna get a million miles away from where I am here, because eventually like someone is gonna come and try to kill me off, and it's gonna be probably any number of the congressional guys, whoever ends up taking the mantle up next. So with that said, I think in a roundabout way I covered this movie, but like also I'm sure there's moments here and there where I was kind of like there's maybe not enough detail here, but like um but yeah, I think I cover this movie in a roundabout way. So let's go out of our way to say I'm gonna get out of here. Bye everybody. Bye everybody.